start out in?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. So we've got this traveling salesperson who's got a home city of St. Louis. St. Louis. And for their job, they have to travel from St. Louis to Atlanta, to Chicago, to Denver.
I don't know.
So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Roanoke doesn't have an airport, though.
Oh, true. All right, Billings.
Okay, so let's do Billings.
I was thinking
Okay,
Billings.
yeah, it does.
I've had many.
Not an airport that gets flight directly from St. Louis.
I was thinking more driving. That's why.
Oh, okay. So we'll say like it's somebody who flies for a living.
All right.
So like I don't know, and it doesn't have to be a salesperson. It could be like a contractor or somebody who flies directly from these cities. So like if you don't want to think of it as a salesperson, think of it as whatever. So and let's say that they're looking like they have to visit each of these cities. So St. Louis is their home. They have to go to every one of these cities and then go back to St. Louis, and they're looking at airfare.
That's a lot.
No, it's a lot of traveling. Yeah, a lot of people do a lot of traveling for their job. And let's say airfare from St. Louis. Possibly, yeah, but like maybe they're their own, like they run their own company, and so they have to pay for it themselves.
Like if I had to do that much though, I'm riding first class. I'm just saying.
So St. Louis to Atlanta, they're pretty close to each other. So let's say that they can get a flight for, I don't know, say $80.
No.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you literally fly. From,
Yeah, if you're flying out of Billings, airfare is ridiculously expensive
you
because
can fly from Bozeman to Seattle for like $100.
right. But if you're flying out of Billings, airfare is expensive. But if you're flying out of a hub city like Denver or Salt Lake or St. Louis, you can get airfare to almost anywhere in the continental United States if you plan ahead for pretty inexpensive. Yeah, but if you are flying from Billings, which is in the middle of nowhere, it's really expensive. Okay, let's say St. Louis to Chicago is $150. Let's say St. Louis to Denver is $175. Let's say St. Louis to Billings is $250. So then we're going to do Atlanta is the next city. So Atlanta to Atlanta has no airfare because Atlanta is Atlanta. Let's say Atlanta to Chicago is $120. Atlanta to Denver is $180. Atlanta to Billings is $300. Chicago is the next city. We don't need to do Chicago to Atlanta because we already have Atlanta to Chicago here. So I don't need to add that here. You guys understand that?
Yeah.
I don't need to do Chicago to Chicago, so I'm going to blank that out. Chicago to Denver, I'm going to say is, and I'm just totally making these up. I could look up actual flight prices. I'm going to say Chicago to Billings. Again, Billings is out of the way, so it's going to be more expensive. I'm going to say that's $320. The next one to add is going to be Denver. Again, I don't need to do Denver to Atlanta because I already have Atlanta to Denver. I don't need to do Denver to Chicago because I already had Chicago to Denver. And I don't need to do Denver to Denver because Denver is Denver. Denver to Billings, I'm going to say is $250. Now, I don't need to do a row for Billings because all of those have already been covered and Billings is Billings. So I've covered all the cities here. Does that make sense? All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a weighted graph out of this. And we've been making weighted graphs for pretty long. It's just what I'm going to use the weighted graph for next is what we're talking about today. So I just need to arrange these 5 cities in this kind of circular order. And it ends up looking like a pentagram, which I know you guys have commented about every single time we've done it. If you took this home for homework, I'm sure some of your parents would be like, what is Mr. Taft having you guys do?
Almost survived.
Yes.
I've taken homework home this year.
I know you haven't, because I've,
Homework home.
yeah.
Well, not yours now.
And I've specifically like tried not to give you guys stuff that you'd have to do outside of this classroom. Exactly.
All right. Anyways.
Okay. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna connect these and we're gonna make sure to put the weights on them. So let's start with St. Louis. So St. Louis to Atlanta, the weight there was $80. St. Louis to Chicago, the weight there was $150. Okay, shush, yes.
You shush.
I can't because I'm the one who's giving the lesson. St. Louis to Denver is $175. I know you do, and yet in St. Louis to Billings is 250.
I was just so confused. It's not even that the drive.
Well, okay, so guys, quiet. The bigger you make this graph, the easier you're going to make it on yourself. If you try to make the graph like scrunched up together, you're not going to be able to read anything, and you're going to make your life more difficult. If you make this graph bigger to start out with, it's going to be easier to read later on. So don't try to make this graph small to start with. Make it like, give yourself some room to actually read this when you're starting out. So like spread these points out. So like do this on a separate sheet of paper, give yourself some space, okay?
Fair enough.
So next I'm gonna do Atlanta. I don't do Atlanta to Atlanta, but I do Atlanta to Chicago. And Atlanta to Chicago is 120. So 120. Atlanta to Denver is 180. So 180. And Atlanta to Billings is 300. That Billings flight is the expensive one. And then I've got Chicago to Denver, which is 120. And then I've got Chicago to Billings is 320. Okay, and now I've got Denver to Billings at 250. So I've got my graph all filled out here. Now, how this is going to work, St. Louis is home. So our salesperson or contractor or whatever, he has to go from St. Louis, visit every city, and then get back to St. Louis. And the way that this person is going to do it is we're going to use nearest neighbor. So we're going to look at each of these paths that this person, he or she, has available to them, and we're going to use the least expensive path available to them at every option. So the first option they have is Atlanta, which is 80 bucks. They have Chicago, which is 150 bucks. They have Denver, which is 175, and they have Billings, which is 250. So which is the least expensive option first? Atlanta, right?
Oh wait, I thought you said. Oh, okay, sorry.
So the least expensive option first, so their path is going to be St. Louis to Atlanta, and that's going to cost $80. And then their next trip, let me move this so that we can see that better. Their next trip is going to be, so now they're in Atlanta. Now, they're not going to go back to St. Louis because they can't go back home yet. Their options are Billings, which is 300, Denver, which is 150, or Chicago, which is 120. So they're going to go to Chicago, which is 120. So we're going to add 120 bucks onto the 80. So now they're in Chicago. So they're St. Louis, Atlanta, Chicago. So now they can go to Denver, which is 120, or Billings, which is 320. So they're going to go to Denver, and which is another $120. Once they're in Denver, they can't go to Chicago because they've already been there. They can't go to Atlanta because they've already been there. They can't go to St. Louis, they've already been there. So then they need to go to Billings. So Billings, which is another $250. And now they can't go to Denver, Chicago, or Atlanta, so now they have to go back to St. Louis, which is how much more? Another $250. So this whole trip, this round trip for him cost 80 plus 120 is 200, plus 120 plus 250 plus 250 is 500. So this is 320 plus 500, $820.
That's not bad.
So nearest neighbor, the path that this salesperson, he or she, would have taken would be, or contractor, whatever, would be St. Louis to Atlanta to Chicago to Denver to Billings to St. Louis, and it would have ended up costing them $820. Make sense? All right, let's take a look at the assignment for today.
You ever been to Atlanta, Mr. Pat?
I have only to the airport.
I was driving through. It was literally hell.
I've heard that their highway system that goes through the city, I've heard that that's messed up.
Yeah, it's pretty screwed up. We were driving through, and we got there at like rush hour pretty much. And it was garbage. It was so horrible. We were on the freeway for like, I don't know, probably 5 hours.
But yeah, I've only ever been to the airport. And that was like,
Running.
We spent over 48 hours in Iceland.
yeah?
Yeah, our flight got delayed, and the one after that had bad weather, so we just kind of canceled.
Sled. You cuddled up with a stranger. Pretty good.
We had some other stuff.
Yeah, I woke up to some blackberries.
Those are like leaning to one side. Somebody hit it late.
They should have.
Billings.
All right, so you're gonna need another piece of paper for this. So grab another piece of paper, please. Make sure you put your name on it too. So we'll go through the first 3 questions together, and then I'll let you guys loose on the rest of it.
Yeah, I was gonna stop that. Yeah, something could be like.
Is it really
Any?
$50?
Page.
What?
Go
Oh,
from
yeah, she's stopped.
Seattle to Chicago.
I found
Get that up.
one airline that was that inexpensive. It's a teeny tiny airplane though.
I do. That's how I met Jay.
It's a puddle
You can
jumper.
sing it though.
Oh yeah.
Dude.
That's how I met Jay. It's like 5 minutes.
No, I'm not even talking about me.
Okay,
I'm talking about girls and shit.
so we got Filbert, traveling salesperson, who needs to travel from his home in
I did
Seattle.
pretty good, huh?
He needs to go from Seattle to LA, Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta, and he needs to do it with the least cost possible. Below is a table that shows airfare for these cities. So we need to create a weighted graph of this situation on a separate piece of paper.
I did pretty good.
Okay, guys. Shh. So first thing you need to do is on a separate piece of paper, we need to create a weighted graph. Now, the reason I asked you to do this on a separate piece of paper is because I honestly think that to make this easier on yourself, you need to have as much space as possible between the points. So don't try to like cram it into here onto this like itty bitty space that I have right there, because you're not going to be able to read it. So on a separate piece of paper,
Sorry, I'm really out of it.
do you need a separate piece of paper from me?
I'm getting there.
Okay. On a separate piece of paper, where you can actually like spread it out and take some space. So we're gonna have a point for Seattle. We're gonna have a point for Dallas. A point for Atlanta. Point for Chicago. And a point for LA. So make yourself some room, and the more room that you have, like the easier it's going to be for you to tell like what label goes where. If you need to use a ruler, I have a drawer over there by Tristan that has rulers in them. Okay. So then you're just going to make the connections and label them. Now, if I wanted to make this complicated, I could like throw in a situation where maybe there isn't a flight from Dallas to Chicago or something like that.
That's messed up. Alright,
Okay, so
here we go.
we're gonna go from Seattle to Dallas is 120 bucks. So I'm gonna make that connection here. So Seattle to Dallas is 120. Actually, I think this works better since I'm using pencil if I do that. Seattle to Dallas is 120. Seattle to Atlanta is 120. Seattle to Chicago is 50.
50?
Mm-hmm. Need about 350. Seattle to LA is 70. And then Dallas to Atlanta is 85.
Wait, what's the other one? Wait,
Which one?
Seattle to LA.
70. Dallas to Chicago is 65. 85. Okay, so we get this weighted graph that looks like that. We're going to use the nearest neighbor algorithm. Don't be afraid of that word algorithm. That was a strong reaction to it. To find the path from Filbert's home city of Seattle back to his home, we're going to record that path here. So from Seattle, he's going to use the cheapest flight that he can first. So we got 120, 120, 50, and 70. So what's the cheapest flight first? Right. So we're going to record the path. So we're going to go Seattle to Chicago. And we're going to find out how much his trip costs on the next one. So I'm just going to, like, while I'm writing down the path, I'm going to write down how much the trip costs down here too. So that first trip was 50. So now he's gone from Seattle to Chicago. Once he's in Chicago, he's going to use the cheapest flight next. So he's not going to go back home yet. He's got 75, 170, and 100. What's the cheapest flight available now?
35 to Atlanta.
So he's going to go to Atlanta. So I'm going to record that flight, so to Atlanta. And I'm going to add 75 to 50. So I've gone Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta. So I can't go back to Chicago. I can't go to Seattle. So my options are either $170 to LA or $85 to Dallas.
85 to Dallas.
So I'm going to go to Dallas next. And I'm going to add 85 to my total down here. So my path so far is Seattle to Chicago to Atlanta to Dallas, and my total is 50 plus 75 plus 85.
Let's go to LA.
And now I have to go to LA, which is $150. So I'm going to go to LA. I'm going to add $150 to my total. And now that I'm in LA, I only have one path left, and that's back to Seattle. So back to Seattle, which is $70. So here's the path, and then this is how much it costs. So I'm going to add these up. So 50 plus 75 is 125.
You're going to be able to check it out.
125 plus 85 is 85 plus 150 plus 70 is 220. 125, this is 210. So 430, unless I added wrong. And I'm going to put the $ sign on it because it's got units. Okay. Thank you, Isaac. Is it both of them?
Oh, what? Missing?
Yep.
No, it's just collections.
Okay.
I'm looking on the